My husband believed his mother when she said I was a thief. He threw me out into the freezing Chicago rain without a second glance. He did not ask for my side of the story. He did not look at the evidence. He just locked the door. That was 3 years ago. Today I am walking back into his life. But I am not the terrified wife begging for her home anymore. I am the nightmare he never saw coming. I stepped out of the sleek black town car. The crisp wind of downtown Chicago bit at my ankles, but I did not shiver. My red-soled heels clicked against the pavement with absolute certainty. I tilted my head back and looked up at the towering glass facade of Sterling Solutions. It was my ex-husband's failing tech firm. And today I was going to break it. I walked through the revolving glass doors and bypassed the security desk entirely. The guards did not stop me. When you walk with enough purpose, people assume you own the building. Soon enough, I would. I stepped into the private executive elevator and pressed the button for the 40th floor. The stainless steel doors slid shut, sealing me in quiet isolation. As the digital display began to tick upward, floor 10, floor 15, a visceral memory clawed its way to the surface. It was the night my marriage ended. The memory always tasted like cold rain and bitter betrayal. I could still hear the sickening thud of my heavy leather suitcase hitting the wet driveway pavement. I could still see my mother-in-law Shirley standing in the warm glow of the porch light. She was pressing a lace handkerchief to her dry eyes, putting on the performance of a lifetime. She had just accused me of embezzling $200,000 from the family trust fund. She claimed she found the bank transfers on my personal laptop. It was a sloppy, ridiculous lie. Any basic audit would have cleared my name in 5 minutes. But Bradley did not want an audit. My husband stood next to his mother, his face a mask of absolute disgust. He did not even look at the fake printed bank statements she was waving around. He just looked at me like I was garbage. I begged him to listen. I pleaded with him to call the bank. Instead, he reached into the foyer closet, pulled out a cheap black umbrella, and tossed it at my feet. He told me to get off his property before he called the police. Then he closed the heavy oak door. The sound of the deadbolt clicking into place was the loudest thing I had ever heard. In the 3 years since that night, I did not cry. I worked. I clawed my way up the corporate ladder of the most ruthless private equity firm in the country. I traded my soft cashmere sweaters for tailored suits and a heart made of ice. Floor 35. The elevator chimed softly, pulling me back to the present. The doors slid open to reveal the plush, mahogany-lined penthouse lobby of Sterling Solutions. I took a deep breath, shaking off the ghost of the terrified woman I used to be. She died in the rain that night. I am Victoria. I am the Senior Mergers and Acquisitions Liquidator for Vanguard Capital, and I am here to collect. I walked down the long corridor toward the main boardroom. Through the frosted glass walls, I could see 2 frantic silhouettes, Bradley and Shirley. They were pacing back and forth like trapped animals. They had every reason to panic. Sterling Solutions was drowning in debt, and today they were scheduled to meet the mysterious Vanguard shark who had just purchased their impending bankruptcy notes. They were expecting a ruthless old man in a gray suit. They were not expecting me. I pushed the heavy double-glass doors open. They swung wide with a loud, heavy thud that made both of them jump. Bradley snapped his head toward the entrance. His eyes widened in shock, and then his face twisted into an ugly sneer. He took a step forward, straightening his expensive tie. He actually thought I was there to beg for a late alimony check or to make a pathetic scene to sabotage his crucial meeting. "You have got to be kidding me," Bradley snapped. His voice was laced with the same arrogant poison I remembered. "Security is on the way, Tori. You cannot just barge in here. This is a restricted floor, and we are about to have the most important meeting of my life. Get out before I have you arrested for trespassing." Shirley clutched her pearl necklace, gasping dramatically. She looked at my designer suit with thinly veiled envy. I did not yell. I did not even blink. I walked right past them, my heels echoing like gunshots in the dead silent room. I reached the head of the massive oak conference table. I lifted the heavy 500-page legal dossier from my leather briefcase and dropped it onto the polished wood. The smack echoed through the boardroom. I pulled out the heavy leather chairman chair and sat down, crossing my legs elegantly. "Sit down, Bradley," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and terrifyingly cold. "You are looking for the Vanguard representative. Well, you found her. I am Vanguard. And as of 9 o'clock this morning, I personally own every single cent of your debt." The color completely drained from his face. Shirley dropped her hand from her pearls, her jaw hanging open in pure horror. The room grew so quiet, I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. The game had finally begun. Shirley stared at the massive stack of papers resting under my hands. Her perfectly manicured fingers began to tremble. The reality of the situation crashed into her fragile ego, and she went into a complete panic. She lunged forward across the polished oak table, her hands clawing frantically at the heavy leather-bound dossier. She actually thought she could just snatch the evidence away from me. But I was not the terrified girl she bullied 3 years ago. I raised my hand and slapped her wrist away with brutal force. The sharp smack echoed like a gunshot in the dead silent boardroom. Shirley yanked her hand back, gasping loudly, as if I had burned her skin. She immediately spun around to face the 3 silent board members sitting at the far end of the long table. The fake tears started flowing instantly. "Look at her," Shirley sobbed, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "She is completely unstable. This is nothing but a vindictive stunt by a bitter ex-wife. Do not forget that she is a convicted thief. She stole $200,000 from our family trust fund. You absolutely cannot let this crazy woman dictate the future of our company." I did not waste a single breath arguing with her desperate lies. I calmly reached into my blazer pocket, pulled out a small black remote, and aimed it at the glass wall behind Bradley. The smart glass instantly frosted over, and the high-definition ceiling projector flickered to life. The massive screen illuminated the dark room with a glaring red financial spreadsheet. The board members physically leaned forward in their chairs, their eyes widening at the grim numbers. I stood up and buttoned my jacket. "I am not here to discuss your fictional ancient history, Shirley," I said, my voice projecting coldly across the room. "I am here to discuss the $32 million in toxic corporate debt that your brilliant son has accumulated over the last 36 months. I pressed the clicker. A new slide appeared showing a terrifying downward graph. I looked directly at Bradley. He was sweating profusely through his custom silk shirt. "Let us dissect your magnificent leadership, Bradley. In Q1, you secretly diverted $2 million from the Vital Research and Development Fund. Where exactly did it go? It went to a shell corporation that subsequently purchased a luxury ski villa in Aspen under your mother's name." I clicked to the next slide. "In Q3, you completely drained the employee pension matching fund. You used those stolen funds to cover a $700,000 private jet lease just so Shirley could take her friends to Paris for Fashion Week." Bradley opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The board members were now glaring at him with pure hatred. "You did not run a tech firm, Bradley. You ran a very expensive piggy bank for your mother, and now it is completely empty." I turned off the projector and let the heavy silence settle over the room. "Vanguard Capital does not care about your family drama," I whispered lethally. "Vanguard cares about its investment, and I am the designated liquidator." I walked slowly around the table until I was standing inches away from Bradley. He cowered in his seat. "Here is your reality check. You have exactly 48 hours to step down as Chief Executive Officer. You will sign over complete financial control of Sterling Solutions to me by 9 o'clock Wednesday morning." Shirley let out a horrified shriek. "He will do no such thing," she yelled frantically. "This is his company." I locked my cold eyes with hers. "If he does not step down, I will initiate a hostile corporate liquidation by Friday afternoon. Vanguard will strip this entire company down to the copper wiring. And because Bradley signed those emergency bridge loans with personal guarantees, the bank will seize your Aspen villa, your Chicago penthouse, and every single asset you own. You will both be held personally liable for millions." I leaned closer to Bradley. 48 hours, Bradley. Tick-tock. I walked out of the towering glass building and did not look back. The crisp city air felt like victory in my lungs. I crossed the busy street and slipped into the dim concrete shadows of a discreet underground parking garage. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows against the damp walls. A sleek black SUV was idling in the darkest corner of the 3rd level. As I approached, the headlights flashed twice. I pulled open the heavy passenger door and climbed into the warm leather interior. Maya was sitting behind the steering wheel. She was a brilliant corporate auditor and the only other person on earth who truly understood my pain. Maya was an African-American woman with sharp eyes and a mind like a steel trap. She was also married to Bradley's estranged brother, making her the other daughter-in-law that Shirley constantly tried to destroy. Maya did not say a word at first. She just reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a highly encrypted silver flash drive. She dropped it into the palm of my hand. The cold metal felt heavier than it looked. "It is all in there," Maya said, her voice smooth and dangerous. "Every single offshore wire transfer, every hidden shell company, and every illegal gambling debt Shirley tried to bury over the last 3 years. I had to bypass 3 separate firewalls to get the master ledger, but I got it." I closed my fingers tightly around the drive. "You took a massive risk doing this, Maya. If Bradley or the board found out you were auditing their private accounts, they would completely ruin your career." Maya let out a short, bitter laugh. "They ruined your life 3 years ago, Tori. I stood in that hallway and watched Shirley plant those fake bank statements on your laptop. I knew she framed you, but I was just the outsider daughter-in-law. I had no power, no money, and no voice to stop her, but I promised myself I would watch her every move from the inside until the perfect moment finally arrived." I looked at Maya, seeing the same cold vengeance in her eyes that burned in my own chest. "We are a united front now. The perfect moment is right here," I whispered in the dark cabin. "We are going to burn her fake empire to the ground." The ambient jazz music in the dimly lit lounge of the Waldorf Astoria offered a brief moment of peace. I sat alone at the polished mahogany bar, swirling a glass of sparkling water, letting the cold condensation chill my fingers. I was exhausted, but my mind was racing with the sheer perfection of my plan. Suddenly, the heavy scent of cheap cologne and sheer desperation ruined the atmosphere. Bradley slid onto the empty leather stool next to me. He did not look like the arrogant chief executive officer from this morning. His tie was loosened, and his dark hair was intentionally ruffled to make him look vulnerable. He signaled the bartender for a bourbon and turned to me with that practiced sad smile he always used to get his way. "Tori, please," he whispered, leaning in far too close. "I know you are angry. I know I handled things poorly 3 years ago, but seeing you today so powerful and completely brilliant, it reminded me of the incredible woman I fell in love with." He reached out and placed his warm hand over mine. I had to force myself not to pull away in pure disgust. "We built Sterling Solutions together," he continued, his voice dripping with fake sincerity. "We can save it together. Call off the Vanguard liquidation immediately. Come back to the company. Come back to me. We could rule the tech industry as an unstoppable team, just like we always planned." I looked down at his hand covering mine, and then up into his desperate eyes. I let the coldness fade from my expression entirely. I softened my shoulders and offered him a gentle, hesitant smile. I needed him to feel totally safe. I needed him to think his pathetic gaslighting was actually working. I let out a soft sigh, playing the role of the conflicted, heartbroken wife perfectly. "Bradley," I asked, keeping my voice barely above a quiet whisper, "I need to know the absolute truth before I can even think about forgiving you. That night in the rain, when Shirley accused me of stealing from the family trust, did you ever actually check the bank logs yourself? Or did you just take her word for it?" Bradley let out a long, dramatic sigh and squeezed my hand tighter. He shook his head, looking almost annoyed by the question. "You know exactly how my mother is, Tori," he said smoothly. "Once she gets an idea in her head, she never lets it go. Honestly, it was just much easier to let you go than to fight her over it. I was stressed with the company, and I did not have the energy to deal with her screaming." He smiled widely, thinking he had just won me back. He had absolutely no idea that beneath the sleeve of my silk blouse, the glowing red interface of my smartwatch was actively recording every single spoken syllable. I smiled back at him, knowing I just secured his absolute destruction. The grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel was dripping in excessive, suffocating luxury. It was a pathetic and desperate display of wealth from a family that was currently drowning in $32 million of debt. Shirley had aggressively organized this $1,000 a plate charity gala using the absolute last remaining drops of Sterling Solutions corporate funds. She had invited the most elite members of Chicago high society, the local media, and every major tech investor in the city. Her goal was completely obvious. She desperately wanted to project a bulletproof illusion of absolute financial strength to the public. But more importantly, she wanted to publicly humiliate me. Because Vanguard Capital now held the primary debt notes, I was legally obligated to attend this financial circus as the active majority stakeholder. I arrived wearing a custom-tailored emerald green evening gown that commanded the attention of the entire room the moment I walked through the gilded doors. I sat in absolute silence at a VIP table near the front, sipping sparkling water and watching the tragic comedy unfold before my eyes. The massive ballroom was filled with the soft hum of live string instruments and the constant clinking of fine crystal champagne flutes. Shirley was working the room like a seasoned, desperate politician. She was draped in heavy diamond necklaces that rightfully belonged to the company ledger, laughing far too loudly and patting the shoulders of wealthy, oblivious socialites. Bradley was standing quietly in the corner, nursing a scotch and looking nervously at his phone. When the lavish dinner service finally concluded, the heavy chandeliers dimmed and a single bright spotlight hit the main stage. Shirley glided up the carpeted steps and took the microphone with practiced elegance. She flashed a brilliant, entirely fake smile at the wealthy crowd. She spoke at length about the deep, charitable traditions of her family and the supposedly enduring, massive success of Sterling Solutions. Then her sharp eyes found mine in the dim light of the room. Her smile twisted into a cruel, highly passive, aggressive smirk. She leaned closely into the microphone. In times of great corporate success, we must always remember the vital importance of unwavering family loyalty, Shirley announced loudly, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. There are always jealous outsiders who try to tear down what a strong, loving family has built. There are always bitter, unstable people who want to steal our joy and our legacy. But the Sterling family stands completely united and unbreakable tonight. To prove our deep commitment to this beautiful city and to those who are truly in need, Sterling Solutions is incredibly proud to pledge an immediate cash donation of $50,000 to the Children's Medical Foundation tonight. The ballroom instantly erupted in thunderous applause. Photographers rushed to the edge of the stage, their bright camera flashes illuminating Shirley's triumphant, glowing face. She looked down directly at me, her eyes practically screaming with arrogant victory. She genuinely thought she had outsmarted me. She actually thought she could use my own company money to buy public favor and trap me in a permanent social corner. I did not clap. I did not even blink or break eye contact with her. I simply reached into my sparkling designer clutch, pulled out my encrypted mobile phone, and opened a direct, secure message to the Vanguard corporate compliance team. The message I carefully typed was only 3 words long: execute the freeze. I pressed send, slipped the phone back into my purse, leaned back in my plush velvet chair, and waited for the real show to finally begin. The thunderous applause was still echoing through the grand ballroom when the atmosphere suddenly shifted. A young woman wearing a headset, the chief event coordinator for the charity, practically sprinted up the side stairs of the stage. She looked completely terrified. Her face was pale, and her hands were visibly shaking as she approached Shirley at the podium. She leaned in and whispered something urgently into Shirley's ear. The arrogant, triumphant smile completely vanished from my ex-mother-in-law's face. It was replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. Shirley forcefully snatched the wireless credit card terminal from the coordinator's hands. She swiped her heavy black corporate card again. The machine beeped a harsh, loud, denying tone that the microphone accidentally caught and amplified across the entire silent room. Shirley frantically dug into her designer purse and pulled out a different gold credit card. She swiped it. Another loud, aggressive beep of denial. She tried a third card. Declined. The terrible sound echoed off the crystal chandeliers. The elite crowd of Chicago high society stopped drinking their champagne. The room grew incredibly quiet, and then the vicious whispers began. The wealthiest people in the city were watching the almighty Sterling family fail to pay a public charity pledge. The humiliation was thick enough to cut with a knife. Bradley realized what was happening and started rushing toward the stage, his face turning bright red with intense embarrassment. This was the exact moment I had been waiting for. I calmly stood up from my VIP table. The rustle of my silk gown seemed incredibly loud in the hushed room. Every single eye in the ballroom instantly turned to look at me. I pitched my voice perfectly, ensuring it sliced through the panicked murmurs like a sharpened steel blade. "Perhaps Vanguard Capital should cover the Sterling family pledge this evening," I announced clearly and confidently. The crowd gasped softly. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, keeping my eyes locked firmly on Shirley. It seems that all of the Sterling Solutions corporate and personal banking accounts have just been frozen due to an active, ongoing federal investigation into suspected wire fraud and severe financial embezzlement. The entire high society crowd let out a collective audible gasp of pure horror. Cameras immediately flashed again, but this time they were not capturing a triumphant donation. They were capturing the exact second the Sterling family social empire burned to the ground. Shirley turned the color of ash. She dropped the credit card terminal onto the wooden stage with a loud clatter. She gripped the edges of the podium to stop herself from collapsing. As she stared down at my calm, victorious face, the terrifying reality finally hit her. She realized that I was not just taking back the tech company, I was systematically destroying every single piece of her stolen fake life. The ballroom descended into absolute uncontrollable chaos. Reporters started shouting questions, and wealthy investors immediately pulled out their phones to call their brokers. I turned away from the stage and walked quietly out of the main room, heading down the long carpeted hallway toward the private VIP coat room. I needed a moment of silence to let the adrenaline settle. But I was not alone for long. The heavy wooden door of the coat room suddenly slammed shut behind me. I turned around to see Shirley standing there. Her expensive updo was falling apart, strands of hair sticking to her sweaty forehead. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, violent rage. She looked like a cornered rat. "You vicious little witch!" Shirley hissed, taking a threatening step toward me. She raised a trembling finger, pointing it right at my face. "You think you are so smart. You think you can just come back here and humiliate me in front of my friends. I will destroy you, Victoria. I will tie you up in court for the next 20 years. I will tell the press exactly how crazy you are. You are nothing but a cheap little gold digger who got lucky." I did not back away. I did not flinch. Instead, I took a slow, calculated step forward, invading her personal space. I leaned in close. The heavy, suffocating stench of her expensive, unearned perfume filled my nose. It smelled exactly like the lies she had been spinning for years. I looked down into her panicked, bloodshot eyes and let my voice drop to a lethal, icy whisper. "You stole $200,000 from your own family, and you blamed it on me, Shirley. You threw me out in the rain to protect your own pathetic theft." I paused, letting the silence hang between us like an executioner's blade. "But the problem is, you got greedy. You could not just stop at the trust fund. So I really have to wonder, what exactly is your darling son Bradley going to say when he finally finds out about the other $4 million you have been hiding in those illegal offshore gambling accounts?" Shirley's bravado completely shattered. The violent anger vanished from her eyes, replaced instantly by absolute paralyzing terror. She stopped breathing. Her knees buckled slightly, and she had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. I smiled warmly, adjusted my silk shawl, and walked out of the room, leaving her alone in the dark. The 48 hours passed with the agonizing slowness of a ticking bomb. At precisely 8:55 on Wednesday morning, I walked back into the main Sterling Solutions boardroom. The atmosphere was completely different today. Bradley was no longer sweating. He was no longer cowering in fear. Instead, he was sitting comfortably at the head of the long oak table, wearing a smug, arrogant smile that made my stomach turn. Shirley sat right beside him, looking utterly triumphant and completely relaxed. She had apparently recovered from her pathetic public meltdown at the luxury charity gala. The remaining senior board members were gathered around the table, looking incredibly tense and completely exhausted. Bradley stood up slowly and casually, buttoned his expensive custom suit jacket. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated condescension. "You are right on time, Victoria," he said smoothly, "but I am afraid you made a massive miscalculation in your little revenge plot. We will not be handing over financial control of this tech company to Vanguard Capital today. In fact, we are not handing over anything to you at all." He gestured dramatically to the massive television monitor mounted on the far wall. "We have called this emergency shareholder meeting because Sterling Solutions has officially secured a powerful white knight investor. An independent private equity group has formally agreed to purchase all of our outstanding debt and inject $10 million of fresh capital into our frozen accounts. Furthermore, they have legally acquired the remaining proxy votes to completely block your hostile takeover attempt. Your little liquidation threat is officially terminated." I did not say a single word. I simply crossed my arms, leaned back in my chair, and waited for the show. Bradley proudly pressed a button on his silver remote to connect the secure video conference call. The large screen flickered black for a brief moment, and then the high-definition camera illuminated the face of our mysterious corporate savior. The smug, arrogant smile on Bradley's face vanished instantly. The color drained from Shirley's cheeks so incredibly fast, she looked exactly like a ghost. Sitting calmly on the massive screen wearing a sharp-tailored corporate blazer and staring back at them with absolute icy authority was Maya. Bradley gripped the thick edge of the table, his knuckles turning completely white. He leaned forward, his voice trembling with a chaotic mixture of deep confusion and sudden rising panic. "Maya," he stammered loudly, "what on earth is this? Where is the investment group representative? Why are you logging into this secure private channel?" Maya leaned closely into her camera, her beautiful expression completely unreadable and entirely professional. "I am the lead representative, Bradley," she said, her confident voice echoing clearly through the expensive boardroom speakers. "My personal private holding corporation officially acquired the required proxy votes at 4:00 this morning. I am your white knight. But I am absolutely not here to save you. I am here to legally vote with Vanguard Capital to strip you of your executive title immediately." Bradley completely exploded. He violently slammed his fists down on the polished oak table, rattling the crystal water glasses and shocking the board members. "You vicious, disgusting traitor!" he screamed loudly, losing every single ounce of his polished corporate composure. "You are supposed to be my sister-in-law. You are supposed to be family. How could you possibly betray us like this? How could you legally side with my crazy ex-wife?" Maya did not even flinch at his pathetic temper tantrum. She calmly adjusted her designer glasses and looked directly into the camera, her dark eyes burning with quiet, lethal intensity. "I am not betraying this family, Bradley. I am actively protecting my family and my financial future from your mother's massive, illegal offshore gambling debts. And I am making absolutely sure that neither of you can ever destroy another innocent person's life ever again." The entire expensive boardroom descended into stunned, paralyzed silence. I slowly stepped forward, taking absolute commanding control of the room. I walked straight up to the digital projector console and calmly plugged in my encrypted silver flash drive. "You actually thought you could just sweep me under the rug, Bradley," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously low, icy pitch. "You thought I was just a naive little submissive wife you could easily discard whenever your greedy mother demanded it." I tapped the glowing console screen with one perfect fingernail. "But you completely forgot that I am incredibly meticulous." I opened the first secure audio file. Bradley's own pathetic voice suddenly filled the silent room, playing the exact crystal-clear recording from the hotel bar just 2 nights ago. "You know exactly how my mother is, Tori," the recorded voice of Bradley echoed loudly for everyone to hear. "Once she gets an idea in her head, she never lets it go. Honestly, it was just much easier to let you go than to fight her over it. I was stressed with the company, and I did not have the energy to deal with her screaming." The senior board members physically gasped in absolute profound disgust. Bradley stumbled backward, falling heavily into his plush leather chair. He stared at me in pure absolute horror, realizing I had completely manipulated his arrogant ego into a legally binding public confession of his own pathetic negligence. But I was not even close to being finished with them. I tapped the digital console screen again, opening the massive encrypted financial folder that Maya had bravely secured from the internal auditing network. Highly classified banking documents, illegal wire transfers, and offshore routing numbers instantly flooded the massive projector screen. I turned to look directly at Shirley, who was now shaking so violently her heavy diamond earrings were visibly clattering together. "You did not just frame me 3 years ago, Shirley," I announced loudly, making sure every single person in the room heard the absolute truth. "You have been actively funneling millions of corporate tech dollars into fake shell companies to fund a massive illegal offshore gambling syndicate." The senior board members started shouting in furious disbelief. Bradley whipped his head around to stare at his mother, his eyes wide with absolute shattering betrayal. "Mother, what on earth is she talking about?" he demanded, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated fear. "Tell me she is lying right now. Tell me you did not steal our operational funds to gamble." Shirley could not even look at her own son. Her face was completely paralyzed with guilt. I pointed a sharp, steady finger directly at her trembling face. "The $200,000 you falsely accused me of stealing from the family trust fund was just your pathetic little test run, Shirley. It was merely your trial to see if you could successfully bypass the internal banking security protocols. When Bradley blindly believed your ridiculous lies and literally threw me out into the freezing rain, it gave you the absolute green light to steal $4 million over the next 3 years. You completely destroyed my entire marriage just to cover up your disgusting criminal gambling addiction." Shirley let out a terrifying, high-pitched, desperate wail. She suddenly scrambled frantically out of her chair, abandoning her expensive designer purse, and ran wildly toward the heavy double-glass boardroom doors. She violently grabbed the thick metal handles and yanked them with all her remaining physical strength, desperately attempting to flee the building before the authorities arrived. But the heavy doors did not open. She violently shook the handles again, sobbing hysterically and screaming for someone to let her out into the hallway. I smiled a cold, ruthless smile that radiated absolute untouchable power. I locked those doors from the outside right before I walked in. "Shirley," I whispered softly into the quiet room, "you are not going anywhere." I pressed a small button on my digital clicker, and the heavy electronic locks on the boardroom doors disengaged with a loud click. The tall glass doors swung open immediately, and 2 stern federal agents wearing dark suits stepped into the room. They bypassed Bradley entirely and walked straight toward my former mother-in-law, flashing their gold shields directly at her terrified face. Shirley let out a pathetic, helpless whimper and pressed her back against the cold glass wall, looking utterly defeated. The lead federal agent loudly recited her full legal name and calmly informed her that she was being placed under immediate arrest for massive corporate wire fraud and severe international tax evasion. The cold metallic sound of the heavy steel handcuffs clicking tightly shut around her expensive diamond tennis bracelets echoed perfectly in the dead silent boardroom. The senior board members watched in absolute stunned silence as the once almighty matriarch of the Sterling family was dragged out of the room completely humiliated. As the heavy doors closed behind her, Bradley completely broke down. The arrogant tech executive fell heavily to his knees right in front of me, openly sobbing and crying so hard his entire body shook. He reached out with trembling, weak hands and desperately grabbed the hem of my tailored suit jacket. "Tori, please," he begged pitifully, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "I swear I had no idea she was stealing that much money from the company. You have to believe me, Tori. Please do not let them send me to federal prison. I will do absolutely anything you want. Just give me one more chance." I looked down at his pathetic, weeping face with eyes as sharp and cold as broken glass. I slowly pulled my jacket away from his sweaty, desperate hands. "I left my umbrella at home 3 years ago, Bradley," I whispered coldly into the quiet room. "Enjoy the rain." I reached into my leather briefcase and tossed a final legal document onto the polished wooden floor right in front of his knees. It was a complete, unconditional surrender of his last remaining proxy shares. I told him he had exactly 60 seconds to sign the paper, or I would legally instruct Maya to hand the federal authorities the exact audit logs proving he was a completely negligent co-conspirator. His shaking hands frantically scrambled for a gold pen. In a span of less than 10 minutes, Bradley lost his prestigious executive title, his massive wealth, and his criminal mother forever. Exactly 1 week later, I stood proudly on the bustling Chicago sidewalk and watched a massive construction crane rip the old Sterling Solutions corporate sign off the side of the towering glass building. The heavy metal letters crashed loudly into a steel dumpster down below, echoing like a beautiful victory bell through the busy streets. A few minutes later, the pristine Vanguard Capital logo was hoisted into its rightful place, catching the bright morning light perfectly. I turned around and took the private executive elevator up to the penthouse office for the final time. Maya was already waiting for me, sitting completely relaxed behind the massive oak desk that used to belong to my pathetic ex-husband. I placed a thick stack of finalized corporate paperwork on the desk and confidently signed my name on the bottom line. It was the official legal decree permanently naming Maya as the new chief executive officer of the completely restructured tech firm. She smiled warmly at me and poured us 2 tall glasses of incredibly expensive vintage champagne. We gently clinked our crystal flutes together in a quiet, peaceful toast to brand new beginnings and flawless justice. I left the corporate building shortly after that fulfilling meeting. As I walked out through the large revolving glass doors, the warm Chicago sun shined brightly on my face. The heavy, crushing weight of the past 3 dark years was completely gone from my shoulders. I had finally reclaimed my entire life, my stolen dignity, and my ultimate power. Karma is an incredibly patient and ruthless hunter. It never misses an address, and it always collects its heavy debts in full. The greatest lesson I learned from this entire nightmare is that when a toxic person finally shows you their true colors, you should never waste your precious time crying over their betrayal. You just need to wipe your tears away, smile politely, and start doing the math. If you felt that incredibly satisfying chill run down your spine when the federal agents walked into that corporate boardroom, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel right now. What exactly would you have done if your own evil mother-in-law framed you for a massive financial crime? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments below, and please let me know what city you are watching this video from today.